Wrapping up 2020, a number of pharmaceutical companies are issuing new vaccines. Many are coming to the forefront. Some say theirs is 80% effective, and others even go as far as saying that theirs are over 95% effective. Still, the danger is not over. Many questions come to mind. Will these vaccines put an end to this virus? Will they have side effects? How many times does one have to take this vaccine? How much does it cost? Many questions that come to mind, but the one that is quite prominent: has our way of life changed forever? You're watching To The Point. I'm Ayman Salah, standing in for Dina Osman. Tonight, we get more answers from our guest, Professor Dr. Donia Hosni Shoeir, Professor of Microbiology, Immunology and Nutrition at the National Research Center. Pleasure to have you with us on the show.
The pleasure is mine.
Before we start, we have a report that we want you and our viewers to watch, and then we start our discussion. As vaccines roll out, the number of infections and death rates soars worldwide. Over 73 million are infected, with 1.6 million dead so far. Last November, US company Pfizer and Germany's BioNTech gave people some hope with their breakthrough announcement of positive results of their clinical trials on the coronavirus vaccine, showing 95% effectiveness. The vaccine, which must be stored in -70 degrees Celsius and transported in special boxes with dry ice and GPS trackers, is a new type called RNA and uses tiny fragments of the virus's genetic code, which the body's immune system recognizes as foreign and starts to attack. On December 2nd, Britain became the first country to approve the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine, and on December 8th, the first dose of the vial was administered to 90-year-old Margaret Keenan in Coventry. A few days later, Moderna announced the discovery of another vaccine, which it claims is 94.5% effective. This is easier to deal with because it stays stable at -20 degrees Celsius for up to 6 months. Following trial results, emergency authorization by the FDA for the vial is expected later this week. Recently, AstraZeneca announced it is also developing a vaccine in collaboration with the University of Oxford, which initially was 70% effective and rose up to 90%. Adding that it is expecting an emergency authorization this month by the Food and Drug Administration to start manufacturing. Pfizer announced its plans to produce 50 million doses and Moderna 60 million before the end of the year. The vaccine will be administered in 2 doses per recipient. China's Sinopharm created another vaccine via a more traditional method of using an inactive virus to trigger an immune response. Other trials are also expected in the coming weeks, and data on Russia's Sputnik V vaccine suggests it is 92% effective. And the quest to find a cutting-edge vaccine is keeping pharmaceutical companies on their toes in the race to face one of the gravest pandemics. A number of questions raise themselves. Who will be vaccinated first? Countries authorizing the administration of the vial have started drawing a priority list of who should be receiving the vaccine first. Will it protect everyone? Are there long-term side effects? And, on a scary note, the new strain of coronavirus, which was recently discovered in the UK. Will this new mutation be contained with this vaccine? Or are we back to square one? All right, so time to start getting answers, and as we introduced earlier, we have with us on the show Professor Dr. Donia Hosni Shoeir, Professor of Microbiology, Immunology and Nutrition at the National Research Center. Pleasure to have you with us on the show once more. Are the vaccines, is it a commercial race?
Yes.
Is it?
Yes, exactly. But there is now a joint initiative between WHO, Gavi, and CEPI to
Gafi, the General Authority for Investment here in
yes,
Egypt.
Yes,
And?
yes. And CEPI to guarantee that all the countries will get the vaccine. For example, no country will take a vaccine more than 20% of their own population before other countries. And there is also a stages for this distribution of this vaccine for each country.
So in each country, there is a priority list, can we say?
Yes, there is a priority list. We can say that the vaccine will be distributed on 3 stages for each country. Stage 1 will be targeted 3% of their own population, including the healthcare professional or the healthcare workers. Stage 2 will include 20% of the population, which are the people aged over 65 years and the people with underlying health conditions. Stage 3 will be for the other priority groups.
Such as?
Maybe such as the other chronic patients.
Okay, so there's a clear line on who should get the vaccine first.
Yes, exactly.
There are, I wouldn't say rumors, but there is news that some who, either in the trial phase or at the start of the vaccination process in England and in the US, have suffered some setbacks from the vaccines. Is this the case? Or is this a part of misinformation campaigns that are going around?
Okay. Let's see in the traditional vaccine development timeline. The traditional timeline for any vaccine should take about 10 years. Okay.
The timeline,
the
trial line.
The trial line should take 10 years, including the preclinical studies and the clinical studies. Okay, all these steps are in consequence. When we finish the preclinical studies, for example, it will take 1 year, so we will move to the other step, which is clinical 1 in phase 1 in clinical trials, and phase 2 and 3, and then phase 4, which is the marketing phase. Okay. So these steps takes 10 years. We have already vaccines. How many vaccines do we have till now? We have
around 10, I believe, 10 companies?
Yes, these are the top 10, but we have already worldwide 198 vaccines. Okay, out of these 198 vaccines, 46 vaccines are on the clinical trials. What you have mentioned, the 10 vaccines are in phase 3 clinical trials.
So they shrunk the 10 years into the 10 months.
10 months, yes. So all know...
So what you're saying is basically expect side effects, because the 10 years shrunk to 10 months, so there will be side effects.
There will be, sure, there will be side effects. And we all know that many medicinal preparations has been withdrawn from the market after 40 years. People
in the market, yes.
In the market, yes.
And yeah, we hear about medicine that are pulled off the shelf after many, many years.
After many, many years. Okay, they discover that there is severe adverse effect, and they outweigh the benefit risk balance. There should evaluate the balance between the benefit and the risk of this drug or this medication. For example, if they discovered a contraindication, not all the drugs, not all the defects or the adverse effect, so the authorities withdraw this drug from the market. They can add a warning label on this drug, such as "Do not take this medicine if you are suffering in case."
Right.
For example,
Right.
yes. Yeah.
Right. So I remember in certain years, one used to take the flu shot. And then the next year, one is eager to take the flu shot again, but they say, no, 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 don't take the flu shot because there's a new mutation, it's a change in the virus, so the old shot that you took will not work this year. In the corona case, the COVID-19 case, how many different mutations do we have? 8 so far?
So far, you mean, yes, and more than 8. We have about 10 mutations.
10.
10 mutations.
So
yes.
what makes me take a certain shot, a certain vaccine? Will it work on the 10? Are the trials covering the 10 different mutations, or is it focusing on one? So if one gets COVID-19, gets corona, and he takes a vaccine, or before he takes the vaccine, this is not what works on him. How would we know?
Okay. As you mentioned, that the flu virus vaccine, okay, each year it's different, okay? They monitor each year the changes in the genetic material of the virus, and consequently they change the vaccine, or they update the vaccine according to this change. And the mutation in the virus is a normal process, okay? Not all mutations are dangerous. The mutation could lead the virus to be weaker or stronger according to the site of mutation and type of mutation. So we don't know, and this is also we have to say all the time that even if there is a vaccine, we should keep physical distance between people. We shouldn't get infected, because the infection can lead the vaccine, can lead the virus to mutate, because it reacts with the genetic material and enters the cells and makes copy of itself, and then transfer to another person.
Which is expected, especially this season in Europe and in the US specifically, with Christmas and the New Year coming up.
Yes.
Isn't that an expectation? You have a country like Germany that went into lockdown. You have Europe so far has not allowed the vaccinations to go through. The US has started, but you have warnings of Christmas gatherings and New Year gatherings. Are we expecting further developments after this holiday season?
Yes, already there is a new variant in UK, which is responsible of the spread of the virus. It is different, and the infectivity rate is higher than previous. So we have already a new variant in UK.
That has already appeared before the holiday season.
Before the holiday season, before the Christmas, before any gathering from any kind. So it is expected.
What's the situation here in Egypt? Now, what is understood is that the Chinese Sinopharm vaccine landed in Egypt.
Yes.
How is this process going to go through?
Actually, any vaccine is evaluated according to two criteria: its safety and antigenicity. Okay, immunogenicity. It means that the safety can be detected from the results of the clinical three or from the phase 3 clinical trials, okay, and also from the technique that is used, or that vaccine is based on this technique. Okay, we have several techniques and we have several platforms for the vaccine development. We have virus vaccine, we have vector vaccine.
All right, let me stop you at the vector vaccine because I don't know what that is, and I would like to know more about it. But first, let's go to Dubai, where we're joined by Professor Dr. Ayman Noureddin, the head of the Federal Pharmaceutical Education at the WHO in Dubai. And correct me if I'm wrong. A pleasure to have you on the line. And first, let me ask you, where is the WHO in all of these? In all of this vaccination race, the competition between the different companies? How will we make sure that developing countries and poor countries will be getting the vaccine and will be handling the situation?
Thank you, sir, for inviting me here, and my pleasure to be with you guys. To answer your question, David, about the WHO, the WHO is very keen to have fair distribution of those vaccines to those countries who are able to purchase it or buy it. And fair distribution is the key word in this type of approach. Through the COVAX program, this is a real well-organized program within the WHO to make sure that all of these vaccines will be purchased, and the money actually is now well prepared for that. And the goal is to have at least 20% of the population of the underdeveloped countries who are unable to purchase that vaccine to get it. So when we have 20%, this is a good percentage that we can have it as a first step for those countries.
All right. Now, one of the issues that come to the forefront for many people is, since the vaccine has emerged and since there is a race to provide the vaccine, then it's all over. No need to worry about COVID-19. Is that the case?
We hope that's the case, but we are not expecting that we are going to wipe out the COVID-19 infection, because this epidemic, it looks like it's going to stay like the flu infection that happens every year. But what we are doing right now is trying to make sure that those 20% of this population, those who are in need for that vaccine, i.e. the frontline healthcare providers, and also elderly and those with chronic diseases, those who are really affected by that vaccine, because those elderly and chronic disease patients are the ones who go to the ICU or go to the hospital. Otherwise, the rest of the population, not normally, we don't go to the hospital. The progression of the infection is not that much for them. So we are focusing on that 20% of the population. If we achieve that, we are safeguarding the community from this type of dire effect of this infection that can lead to death at many stages. So this is an initial goal. Hopefully, later on, once we have more than one vaccine available, and then the production lines are really well established, especially in the local countries, like for example here, we are preparing to produce ourselves, the Sinopharm vaccine. And through the bacteria, we can do that. And I know that the Ministry of Health, they make sure that we have the capability and to do that. And the WHO actually came and began to inspect the facilities and make sure that everything is okay. So this will happen in Egypt, maybe in India will do the same thing. So we have many production sites besides those major, production sites like Pfizer, Moderna, China, and Russia, and India. So this way we can have a complete cover of most of the population later on. It will take some time, but we start with the first stage for the 20% population. I think this is a good goal and achievable goal for us.
One final question, Dr. Nuruddin. We've been following the courageous candidates that started taking the shots, those who have been vaccinated. What would you tell me in order to encourage me to take the vaccine with all the side effects that have been reported and with the side effects that can emerge that are still not tracked?
It is just simple. You can just weigh the benefit versus the risk. The risk is especially for those who are elderly and with chronic diseases. The risk is dire, is really bad because we have at least 80% of them, you go to the hospital for sure, and some of them in the ICU, and some of them die. So this is a high risk. You can't risk that. This is your health and your life. At the same time, the other side is the risk of the side effects of the vaccine, which is, if you weigh that, you find that it is not that much because the reported side effects are very minimal. We talk about symptoms, increase of temperature, symptom body ache. It just, it goes, within a couple of hours or maybe days maximum. But that's it. And this is classic for all of the vaccines. When you have the vaccine, you can have even irritation or inflammation of the site of the injection. You have these side simple effects, and these are minimal. So if you look at that, you find that the risk of not taking the vaccine, especially for those high-risk people, is really overwhelming. And it makes sense that you take that vaccine. And if you look at the side effects, no reports of side effects that are really, or serious side effects that are reported till now. Although we had a quick, clinical studies, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, but all the reports are studied well and very precise data and conclusions were drawn out of these, studies. And that's why when you say that FDA approved it, it doesn't approve anything without real, very precise, keen follow-up on the data and making sure that this drug or vaccine is safe. And the same thing happens also with the Ministry of Health here. We cannot approve anything without making sure that it's safe. And safety is the key. So I can assure you that we are now in good shape because till now there is no real bad or serious adverse effects. Maybe you can mention the evidence of those patients.
Dr. Ayman Nuruddin, head of Federal Pharmaceutical Education in Dubai with the WHO. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm sorry I had to cut it short, but we're going to go for an update of our top stories, and then we will return with our guest, Dr. Donia Hosni Shoeir, Professor of Microbiology, Immunology and Nutrition at the National Research Center, here in To The Point with Dina Osman. Welcome back. You're watching To The Point with Dina Osman. I'm Ayman Salah, sitting in for Dina. We continue our discussion, and we were talking with Dr. Donia Hosni Shoeir, the Professor of Microbiology, Immunology and Nutrition at the National Research Center, about the coronavirus vaccine, the number of vaccines, and we stopped. A pleasure to have you on the show once more, Dr. Donia.
The pleasure is mine.
We stopped earlier. There was a vaccine that you mentioned that I didn't understand when you said the vector vaccine, and I asked you to continue the explanation after our phone call with Dr. Ayman Nuruddin earlier. What is a vector vaccine?
Okay. First, I mentioned a viral vaccine. Virus vaccine is introducing the virus, but in two types. Either it is dead virus, okay, or live attenuated virus. It's live virus, but we removed the pathogenic part of that virus, okay? This is the first type. Second type, the vector vaccine. For example, COVID-19 or SARS-CoV-2 has a protein which is S-spike protein that which is immunogenic, that stimulate our immune system. So they remove the gene which is responsible for that protein, and they put this protein inside a non-infectious virus. Okay, this technique is used in AstraZeneca vaccine, for example,
which had side effects. That's why they stopped it first.
Yes, but the technique is not was used and it is commonly used in the field of vaccines. The adenovirus vaccine, which is vaccine that is non-infectious to the human, okay, and when this vaccine enters the cell, they makes a copy of the protein, of the S-spike protein, and induce the immunity.
There are countries that announced that they entered the third phase of COVID-19. Here in Egypt, the
third wave,
the second wave is starting.
Yes.
According to the Presidential Advisor for Health and Prevention Affairs, Dr. Mohammed Awad Taghdin, he said Egypt is entering the second phase, the second wave of COVID-19. What should we look for?
We should look for that this wave is different from the first wave. Because the first wave started in last March, which is the beginning of the spring, and ended in August. It ended in the summer, but this one will start in the winter, okay, or on the autumn, and will end. It will last for a long time. It will be longer. It may extend to next August, because there is other viruses we face in the winter, like the flu virus vaccine, the flu virus, okay. So we have to take care of this in this wave.
So our precautionary measures should continue as is here in Egypt or anywhere in the world.
Yeah, even after getting the vaccine, even after, because we have to know that the vaccine will not prevent infection with COVID-19.
So if a person takes the vaccine, he is still prone to being infected with COVID-19.
Exactly.
So what's the benefit of taking the vaccine?
Like the benefit of taking flu virus vaccine. Exactly.
So it's a milder infection.
It's milder infection. The period or the duration of infection will be
decrease.
Will decrease, yes. So it will not prevent you from catching COVID-19, but it will lessen the symptoms, okay, and will decrease the morbidity and mortality rates for this COVID-19.
So basically turning it into another flu.
Exactly. And it
another severe flu.
Another severe flu. Anyway, after this wave, after the second wave, there will be a third wave for this virus, okay? And at the third wave, the virus will be like the flu, exactly like the flu, because the virus will be much more weak from the replication from a person to another, and by time this virus will become weak.
There are a number of vaccines, and you mentioned earlier that there are the top 10 One of the top 10 is the Chinese, another is the Russian, a third is the American and the German, and so on. Yet the Russians were the first to come up with the vaccine, to announce coming up with a vaccine that they started approving, if you will. But there seems to be lack of information in that regard.
Yes, there is a lack of information about the Russian vaccine, and it was highly criticized for this point. But finally, they declared that the efficacy of that vaccine reached 91%. Okay, and the technique of this vaccine is, as I said, viral vaccine. It is adenovirus vaccine, but with the protein of coronavirus inside this virus. So it's a commonly used technique.
What about the Chinese one, the Sinopharm vaccine?
The same technique
as the Russian
Russian one, yeah.
What's the difference between, the major difference between those kinds of vaccines and the one that is being used in England, for example, or in the US?
Pfizer, you mean Pfizer?
Right.
Okay. This one is nucleic acid vaccine, which is DNA, the DNA or the mRNA of the vaccine will be entered inside the cell. Okay, this type of vaccines was not used before in the field of vaccine. This is a new technique. This is injecting the genetic material of the virus inside the human cell. So we don't know that
to provoke the internal immunity, the immune system?
The immune system. This technique was used before in the cancer treatment.
Right.
But it's
which so far has not proven
totally
total
new
efficacy
for the field of vaccination.
All right. Let's take a call. We're joined by our guest, Professor Dr. Islam Anan, Professor of Pharmacology and Pandemics. Dr. Islam, a pleasure to have you on the show here tonight. Let's start with the second wave that we have entered into here in Egypt. What would you say needs to be done on the part of the decision makers and on the part of the people at this stage?
Perfect. So first, good evening, and good evening to your guests and the viewers. So you've tackled a very important point. So to end any pandemic, as we know, we do have 4 different scenarios. It's whether the virus will just fade away on its own, and that happened with SARS, for example, and MERS, or to have an efficacious and effective treatment, and so far we don't have something like this. And third one is to close the circuit between any infected and a healthy individual by lockdown, and by experience we figured that the world will not going to be able to make a total lockdown. So we'll end up with the 4th scenario, which is to have a good vaccine that we can actually provide to the people. So since we do have only 4 options, we do have first part, which is like 50% on the government and the healthcare policy and strategy itself, which is to provide better capacity in terms of hospitals, more ICU beds, try to purchase as much possible from the PPEs and supplies, the protocols and so on. And that's actually what was done during the preparation phase of the second wave. We all know now that we do have a special authorization, the Unified Purchase Authorization, that purchased already all the supplies for wave 2. So we are well acquainted with what to purchase and what to get, especially from the treatment protocols, because currently we do know the protocols that we're going to use. If you remember at the beginning of wave 1, we couldn't identify exactly which protocol to follow. 1 month we do have dexamethasone, hydroxychloroquine, is it good, is it bad, remdesivir, favipiravir, and so on. We do have identified good protocols right now. So that's the first part. And actually the second part, which is very important, is to have a good awareness among us that second wave is as strong as wave one. We need to follow the measures. We need to wear our masks. We need to make sure that we do have the social distancing and that we are following the precautions, and we are convinced. And I'm going to stress very fast regarding the awareness campaigns, and it's actually common between the government, authorities, and the individuals, is I guess we need, prior to the awareness campaigns, to have a buy-in campaign to convince people, because if we are teaching people how to wear masks and how to behave and not to be in a crowded places, first we need to convince them, and I can see from people around me that we need to convince that the virus is still vicious, transmission is not that easy, the virus does exist, it's not the end. We're going to spend the winter without a vaccine because most probably the vaccine will arrive for a full amount that's going to cover like 20% or 30% of injections by end of quarter one of 2021 or quarter two. So it's a common responsibility, as you mentioned, exactly between the authorities and the individuals. It's a common thing that we need to follow.
All right. Now, you said one of the things you mentioned is the awareness campaign. We all know what has been done in terms of awareness, either on television stations, on radio stations, yet there seems to be a certain reaction from the people not wanting to believe or not wanting to adhere to the precautionary measures. This we see, as you mentioned, in your circles, in my circles, I believe in your circles as well. We know a lot of people that still are not convinced of the precautionary measures that should be used. When you walk in the streets, you have this issue. When you look at people in, or when you ride public transportation, you still face this issue. Are we in a situation where there should be more forcefulness in terms of imposing the face masks, in terms of imposing certain sanitation measures in public areas?
That's a point. And I guess we have two things here. The first is to have better legislations and laws to enforce and impose the mask wearing among individuals to, for example, apply the rule of six, like the United Kingdom, where people are not allowed to be in gatherings more than 6 individuals in one place. And the second point, I guess we need to focus more in a buy-in campaign and in convincing awareness campaigns, because, you know, awareness is not only one phase. First, there's the buy-in phase, then there is an awareness phase, and then there is an educational phase. We are focusing more on the educational phase to teach people how to wear masks, how to behave in gatherings. But actually, we need to make a step prior to that, which is to convince them, as you said exactly, and to establish a good scientific awareness about how the virus is actually spreading, to make testimonials from recovered patients to tell their stories so people can actually see that the treatment is not that easy, the disease is not that easy.
Let me conclude with you and with Dr. Donia on another note. Should the awareness be a part of the new generation's education? Is this going to be our new way of life, and we should be prepared? If not our generation, then the new generation, we should prepare them for the new way of life that is to come?
Definitely. I totally agree. And I guess it started already at schools, and they are trying to make the students, the pupils, more aware about what's going on and what's the new sanitation guidelines and how we can apply better measurements and better rules for actually keeping our hygiene in a better shape. So yes, I guess it's very good that we can actually apply some new amendments and reforms in the educational system to include in the curriculums public health. If we can teach our students at school level some public health rules, I guess we can avoid a lot of future hazards, and because it's not going to be the last disease that we're going to face. I hope it will be the last pandemic, but definitely it's not going to be the last disease or virus. So we need to be prepared. We couldn't mitigate the current pandemic, but I guess we can mitigate the future one.
Dr. Islam Anan, Professor of Pharmacology and Pandemics, thank you very much for joining us here. Dr. Donia, let me wrap up with you. In the late 90s, that was my first trip to Japan. Oh. And I was walking in the streets, and I would see these people walking in the street wearing a face mask.
Yeah.
So I was curious, because I've never seen this in my country or in other developed countries, in the US, in Europe, and so on. So I asked, why are they wearing masks? They said, well, they have the flu. And here's, if you have a flu, then you wear a mask. So it's part of the culture. Are we in a situation now where, if our generation is not going to adhere with this new way of life 100%, maybe we should focus on the new generation, the education of the new generation, the new way of life? How do we protect ourselves in the future?
Yes, it's a very important point that we should educate the new generation about these issues, about this preventive measurement. We shouldn't wait for the pandemic or for the disaster to occur, and then we see how to manage or how to mitigate this situation.
So we should take the lead with the new generation.
Yes.
All right. Is Egypt close to announcing a new vaccine?
The vaccine of the National Research Center.
Right.
Okay. The National Research Center is working in 3 different disciplines. First one, the vaccine. The National Research Center already created or invented 4 vaccines, but one of them has passed all the preclinical studies and now got the approval for the phase 1 clinical trials. The second discipline is antiviral drugs from natural products. We have 4 promising antiviral drugs, but they are now under clinical trials. Okay. The third one is to find a diagnostic kit, a simple and cheap diagnostic kit for the COVID-19 infection.
So instead of the
PCR, yes, yes,
a cheaper
and
a cheaper kit, so as to have more people check if they have the virus or not.
Or not, yes.
And to have a clearer idea of how many people are really infected in any place.
To get the good statistics and to know more about the number of infected people, yes, it will help.
So if you had countries or companies, pharmaceutical companies, that shrunk the period, the vaccine discovery period from 10 years to 10 months, when do you expect Egypt to have this hopefully new vaccine?
I think I cannot foretell, but I think it will take another 1 year, okay, to perform phase 2 and 3 clinical trials. Okay, so I think it will take another year.
Dr. Donia Hosni Shoeir, Professor of Microbiology, Immunology and Nutrition at the National Research Center. Thank you very much for joining us. It was a pleasure having you. It was also a pleasure having our guests, Dr. Ayman Noureddin and Dr. Islam And then I'm Ayman Salah sitting in for Dina Osman, and this was To The Point.